Time now for Witness here on the BBC World Service. And 40 years ago today, 3 American astronauts are on their way to the moon when disaster strikes. Richard Haise has been speaking to one of the astronauts from Apollo 13, Fred Haise.
April the 14th, 1970. Apollo 13 is 200,000 miles from Earth, heading for the moon. The astronauts Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert and Fred Haise are carrying out routine checks and procedures according to schedule. The mission is going smoothly. They are receiving instructions from Mission Control in Houston.
We've got one more item for you when you get a chance. We'd like it to stir up your cryo tanks. In addition, I have a shaft and trunnion.
Okay.
For a look at the Comet Bennett if you need it.
Stand by.
An explosion on board. Fred Haise rushes back to his station.
There was a loud bang, metallic sound. As I was drifting up to get through the tunnel to get back into the command module of the mothership, there was some crinkling of metal in the tunnel where the vehicles moved relative to each other and actually caused enough stress to buckle some metal in the tunnel area.
Commander Jim Lovell got straight on to Mission Control.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Houston, we've had a problem. A legendary understatement.
The biggest thing was confusion, trying to sort out what really had gone wrong. When I arrived in my position in the right couch and looked at the instrument panel, just the number of readings on several meters told me immediately we had lost one oxygen tank. I immediately had just a sick feeling in my stomach because I knew that was constituted an abort, and we had literally lost our chance to land on the moon.
But they hadn't just lost their chance to walk on the moon. The explosion in the oxygen tank had crippled the spacecraft. Some of their power systems had been badly damaged. The challenge now was to get back to Earth at all. They knew they needed to preserve as much energy in the spacecraft as possible. Apollo 13 at this point was made up of 3 parts: the badly damaged service module, the command module, which was designed for the return to Earth, and the lunar module, which was only designed to get them onto the moon. Now they had to use the lunar module as a lifeboat to get home. The problem being that the lunar module was only meant to work for 2 days and was flimsy and lightweight.
We would need it for life support and communications and navigation and control. We got extremely busy with a requirement to do a very rapid power-up of that vehicle, much faster than we normally would have done.
Fred Haise says their training and their characters were their most valuable resources. All the men knew the systems and technologies of their spacecraft intimately, and the mission commander, Jim Lovell, was one of NASA's most experienced astronauts.
It was good to be with Jim, who really had the right personality for this set of conditions. Jim was very even-headed, had himself a good manner, sense of humor, obviously wouldn't tend to lose his cool. We re-sought a specialist in our own right about the vehicles. I had spent 7 months out of 9 months at the plant in Grumman where lunar modules were being fabricated and tested. Similarly, Jack Swigert had helped develop the initial contingency procedures for the command and service module, the contingency procedures being emergency procedures for systems.
Now the crew of Apollo 13 must use the moon's gravity like a giant slingshot to flick them back towards Earth. They had to fly around the dark side of the moon, the side that people on Earth never see.
The backside is quite different from the front. Most of it is much more rugged, hilly looking. My impression is it's very stark looking, with so many potholes and craters. Really a beat-up large rock is what it looks like, with not too much coloration. You've heard the colors from grays to darks to light shade and even whitish out of streaks coming out of some craters, but fairly colorless, unfriendly-looking place.
Back on course for Earth, 250,000 miles of space separated the astronauts from home. Conditions inside the space capsule were difficult. How did they cope?
It was not a matter of functioning per se because of the requirements to meet the task and what had to get done meant getting home or not. It was damp because of the moisture buildup. We went down in the lunar module to probably mid-30s Fahrenheit. We did not have adequate clothing for that kind of condition. You couldn't sleep for very long periods because of that environment. So it was tiring, if you want to look at it from that aspect, and just miserable to be sitting there for lots of hours in that sort of environment.
Cold, wet and tired, without any computers to guide them, they flew on for 2 days. With air recycling systems switched off, carbon dioxide was building up inside the capsule. The astronauts had to rig up homemade air filters using cardboard, duct tape and socks to stop themselves dying of carbon dioxide poisoning. Navigating back to Earth was done by skillful hand-eye coordination and teamwork.
Coming back, we had only 2 major things we did, and we did do 2 further mid-course corrections on the way back. We did them without computers. It was done totally manual with Jim using the controls to steer onto the cusp of the Earth with a coas, that's like a gun sight in the left window, then pitching from that point to where I could pick up the sun. I would tell him to stop the pitch rate, and we froze the attitude at that point, and that's how we got in a position to then manually run the engines.
The damaged spacecraft and its crew now prepared for the most dangerous part of the mission, re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. The lunar module and the service module were jettisoned. As the service module floated away, the astronauts saw for the first time just how much damage had been done by the explosion.
And there's one whole side of that spacecraft missing.
Is that right?
Right by the high gate antenna, the whole panel is blown out, almost from the base to the engine.
Copy that.
That's just dark brown streak. It's really a mess.
Now the re-entry began. Jim Lovell, Jack Swaggart and Fred Haise would make the final part of their journey to Earth at unimaginable speed, cocooned in their space capsule from the furnace-like temperatures of the upper atmosphere. Target, the central Pacific Ocean.
You're looking backward, and you can see the fireball trailing. When it rolled, you see a little swirl pattern change in that fireball trailing you, which gradually, as you got it slowed up and got in deeper, it would change coloration from a more hotter, I guess, red, orange, to even eventually just a brown stream of like smoke trailing you, and eventually to get the drogue chutes out that stabilize you as you're coming through, I think, about 60,000 feet. Then you wait for really what means you really got it made is when you see the main chutes deploy. Obviously, in our case, we got all 3 chutes out, and that's the first time you know you're really home. The splashdown itself might be a little jolting. In our case, that wasn't as bad as I suspected it might be when you're finally home.
On the way down towards the sea, I can imagine some big smiles on all of your faces. Were you talking to each other and relieved and saying some prayers of thanks, perhaps? You have been on one of the most incredible adventures.
No, surprisingly, there was not much conversation. We had post-landing checklists to go through to get the vehicle safed and ready for when the divers outside safed everything and got ready to open the hatch. No, there was no conversation I recall about what had transpired at that point or what our mutually our feelings were. It wasn't like Hollywood, everybody shouts and slaps everybody on the back, and no, there was none of that.
Although Apollo 13 is one of NASA's most famous missions, none of the astronauts ever returned to space.
Witness was written and presented by Richard Haise. You're listening to the BBC.